Okay, perfect. So now I will officially begin by welcoming our first speaker of 2022, Dr. Brittany Wilkins. And Dr. Brittany Wilkins is the MSW Program Director and an Associate Professor in the Social Work Department at ETSU. She earned her master's degree and PhD in social work from Florida State University and is a licensed clinical social worker. Wilkins' work centers on crisis stabilization, alcohol and drug treatment, and outpatient mental health. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Wilkins has previously facilitated zone training and is currently serving as a co-developer for Safe Zone 2. And Dr. Wilkins is also the newest member of the WGSS steering committee, and we are just so delighted to have her on board with our program. So today she is going to be talking about teaching social justice concepts using popular culture as a metaphor, Harry Potter. She is ready. So Dr. Wilkins, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to be talking about two of my absolute favorite topics, teaching and Harry Potter, in case you couldn't gather that from the outfit today. So yes, I am Dr. Brittany Wilkins, super excited to be here, and I did share my screen and we are good to go. Great. I want to highlight someone who this presentation could not be done without, and she's also one of my favorite people. This is Colleen Melton, nee Cummings, on the left, dressed as Professor Trelawney. She came back from a social work conference and talked about how exciting the speaker was and how much fun it was to learn about teaching social justice with Harry Potter. And I said, let's do this as a Harry Potter nerd. She is also a Harry Potter nerd. We created a whole class together, Harry Potter and the Quest for Social Justice, and is offered as an elective in the social work department. And yeah, Colleen's just a rock star. She's at University of Denver now. She was a clinical assistant professor with us for a while. So I want to highlight my Professor Trelawney, if you will. So today we have a tri-part plan. We have 3 different sections we're going to kind of go through. I'm going to talk about some introductory stuff and talk about some definitions. I'm then going to go into the meat of teaching social justice using Harry Potter, the wizarding world, if you will. And then I'm going to walk, hopefully, if there's time, walk us through an example of what maybe a day in the life of the class would be. So that's the plan right now. All right, here we go. And yes, I used the Lumos font for this presentation. So the elephant in the common room. I just want to start and say, well, one, there was no JPEG for elephant in a common room. So my lovely brother-in-law made this for me, found the common room and the elephant. He created this. Let's talk about the problematic author, J.K. Rowling. Although this series is much beloved, it also has some serious flaws and much deserved criticism. The author has expressed some bigotry content, transphobic, transmisogynistic remarks, which cannot be separated from her artwork. Not the purpose of this talk. If you take the elective, we'll talk about it ad nauseum, but that's not necessarily what we're going to focus on today. What I do want to say is I'm acknowledging and definitely acknowledging how problematic JK is. If you're interested, Teen Vogue, yes, that Teen Vogue has a great article they put out this month about how problematic the author is, with some amazing suggestions on how to not support the Rowling machine, but to love Harry Potter in your own way. So there you go. Related to the problematic author, we also must acknowledge the incredible lack of diversity in the books and the movies. While I know some retconning is happening, there's still this lack of diversity. This is not a totally unproblematic series, and I just really want to acknowledge that before we move on. So to go over some terminology, fandom is a community of fans. Canon is, I should also say the community of fans for Harry Potter is pretty intense. We're not just passively enjoying this pop culture phenomenon, we are actively engaging in it, in case you couldn't tell. One specific way that fans are kind of working through in their own way this lack of diversity is through fanfic, which is amateur fictional writing by the fans, which is unauthorized, but based on the existing work of fiction, in this case, the books and movies about Harry Potter. Canon is source material. So in this case, typically the books written by J.K. Rowling, and also the movies. If you know, you know. We don't use Cursed Child or the Fantastic Beasts or any of her Twitter posts when we teach this class. And hopefully you know why. Also, I want to definitely talk about, I'm going to be using the word muggle a lot. And what muggle means is what most of us here today probably are, which is non-magical folk. So we have magical folk, which are those in the wizarding world. I know I'm making some generalizations here. I saw Heidi's face. I know I'm making some generalizations, but probably for most of us, we're muggles, and that's okay. That's okay. We'll talk more about it. All right. Now I'm going to jump into the meat, the part 2, actual teaching of the social justice concepts using Harry Potter. I wanted to start off with this quote. In contemporary society, popular media culture is the dominant culture. Studies have shown that being exposed to certain stories decreases prejudice, and Harry Potter is one of those that has been shown to decrease prejudice. So how can we harness the magic of Harry Potter reducing prejudice and bring that into a class to help facilitate this to people who maybe aren't as obsessed with the stories and books as some other people are, and bring some other people in? Pop culture in the classroom is not new. And the more recent research about using pop culture, specifically Harry Potter in the classroom, obviously is a little bit newer. And I just want to say that in a pop culture classroom, the learning about the pop culture isn't necessarily what we're doing. I don't care if you know wand lore, just saying. If you do, that's cool too. If you can hear the wands talking to you, more props to you. However, that's not necessarily what we're talking about. Trust me, there'll be people like me in the class. But if you don't know as much about Harry Potter, that's okay. We're just using these familiar stories and scenarios to stimulate student interest and motivation. Satterley did an amazing article. He described the pedagogy of fandom, where this is the teaching practice of employing pop culture fandom followings to stimulate student motivation in content and process social justice issues. And he talks specifically about social work with their social justice, which is pretty cool. Social justice, I'm sure you know, it can be a tough topic because it goes beyond awareness and actually addresses the issues of equality, power relations, and institutional oppressions, and requires that people challenge dominant ideology and become an advocate for change. And using culture, especially for difficult dialogues, can really help students' ability to process issues of social, political, economic structures, and even examine their own prejudices. Using fandom to help our students with tougher concepts process these themes of diversity, social justice, and privilege in class just helps. What we do is we try to start with the concepts further away, which is using the Harry Potter metaphor, and then allow them time to process and hopefully more comfortably allow them to examine themselves. So for example, stimulating a conversation about blood status, pure blood, half blood, muggle-born, squib, or muggle, I hope people know what I'm talking about, is easier, right, to objectively discuss maybe white privilege than just opening up the conversation talking about white privilege, right? It's a little bit safer at a distance, and then we kind of can bring it a little bit closer. So, this was a fun one to make too. So managing defensive reactions effectively results in deeper and more meaningful discussions about diversity and social justice. So these conversations allow students to process into a process called privileged identity exploration. So, and as many of us who have begun this ongoing process of checking our own privileges know, it's an inherently difficult thing to do and can kind of bring up our own defensive modes, especially in the classroom where people can just be shut down. So we tried to help students not feel like Dolores Umbridge with the centaurs and hopefully be a little bit more open to being in a safe space and using this parallel process to look at the wizarding world and the muggle world. The goal here is for the students to be able to hear, if you will, other ways of thinking by staying in their logical brain and not living in their emotional brain, because sometimes the emotional brain overrides the logic. So that's kind of the hope here. Interactive classrooms. Think about the difference between Dolores Umbridge's defense against the dark art classroom versus Remus Lupin's defense against the dark art classroom. What were the differences? What were the similarities? Where do you think the students got more from? Well, let me help you. Hopefully, I would have guessed Professor Lupin's and dare I say even Professor Moody in a way. Sorry, I going down a rabbit hole. The goal is to help students with analogical reasoning, which is based on this idea, a relational model between two exemplars, in this case, Wizarding World and the Muggle world. And these are difficult dialogues, right? These are verbal exchanges of ideas or opinions between citizens within a community that centers on an awakening of potential conflicting views of beliefs or values about social justice issues, racism, sexism, ableism, heterosexism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The facilitation of a safe space is of primary importance. This safe space facilitates an open, honest conversation, hopefully free of emotional or psychological harm. But I really want to encourage you to think about safe space as a liminal space. It's not a, hey, once you got it, you got it. You have to re-up safety in spaces as much as possible so that people continue to feel safe. And safety doesn't mean comfort either. Even though we're learning at a distance first and then bringing it in, and safe space is facilitating that, it's still going to create some discomfort, and attending to those feelings is super important too. There are some suggestions from the University College of London for helping create a safe space in Muggle classrooms. I'm just going to go over 5 of them here. Learn how to pronounce students' names correctly. How many of us were pronouncing Hermione wrong when we were reading it for the first time? Yeah, learn how to pronounce students' names correctly. Address challenging behavior head on and use these as teachable moments. Use micro affirmations. Establish ground rules for interaction with your students at the beginning of the course, hopefully collaboratively, and even write a diversity and inclusion statement in your syllabus. Just some ideas. All right. This is great, Brittany, but tell me about the class. No problem. Your wish is my command. The Wizarding World can help people better understand these tough topics. And we're going to talk more about the specific tough topics we address in a second. A lot of our activities, Colleen and mine, involve perspective taking and simulation. So we would have, well, I won't get into it. We'll talk about that in a second. What a big part of this was participatory culture. And this is built on and sustained by informal peer-to-peer mentorship, wherein each member of a group acquires new knowledge by tapping into the expertise of their peers. So we would have people divided into their group, into their houses, their Hogwarts houses, and we would have, and since this was a stacked class, we would have undergrads and grads. There we are. And our grad students would be the heads of house, and they would help with these informal peer networks. And as the class progressed, we started breaking down the barriers between the houses, because that's one of the problems with Hogwarts, if you ask me. Hate to say it, but it's true, is this divisive nature of the different houses. So all of this to say, this participatory culture provides access for students to engage in civic and social justice issues in their own world by seeing these same issues at play from the fictional world in which they're engaged. All right. So some of the social justice issues in Harry Potter, and I'm sure you can think of others. These are just some. The Ministry of Magic, to discuss complicity, childhood trauma and its effects. We talk about adverse childhood events. We also talk about resiliency. I mean, think about this. Potter and Voldemort, their beginnings weren't that dissimilar. They're both orphans. We talk about spew, which isn't in the movies, for those of you who've only seen the movies, to open up conversations about space for the agency and subjectivity of marginalized people. Sometimes white saviorism is brought in there. Some other social justice issues include blood status, to open conversations about eugenics and white privilege, child protective system, talking about foster care placements versus kinship placements, centaurs and house elves, talking about oppression and isms. Werewolf, I guess it's backwards. Headlines from the Daily Prophet and the Quibbler to discuss fear as a political tactic, and also werewolves to talk about victim blaming and disability, possibly Mad-Eye Moody in there too. Moody. Now I'm second guessing myself. Sorry, in my head too much. So did this work, Brittany? Well, here's a fabulous quote from CB. CB, if you're here, I appreciate it. To this day, when I'm asked what my favorite college course has been, I always answer the Harry Potter class. It was spellbinding to see my favorite book series of all time intertwined with my major. The class helped me understand intersectionality more because we used Harry Potter characters as examples to teach us how to map intersectionality. After the lesson, I was able to understand what oppression was and how to identify it through the activities we completed in class. Not bad. Thank you, CB. It's just one example. All right, so we're in part 3 and good, we're doing great on time. I definitely wanted to get into the activities with you. So we're gonna do that. First up, I'm gonna give an example lecturette. So it's gonna be really, really simple. This is an introductory to social justice kind of course. I'm going to talk about, spoiler, intersectionality here coming up, but please, if you're Captain Intersectionality, please know this is just dipping our toes in, getting students familiar. It's not the whole focus of our course. This is just getting students familiar with the concept of intersectionality and ready to kind of start exploring it. All right. So intersectionality, what is intersectionality? It's a framework to better conceptualize the dynamics between coexisting identities and their interconnected systems of oppression. Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a civil rights activist and scholar of critical race theory, was the first to write about intersectionality. She argued that other sociological theories of the time and advocacy groups and social justice movements only looked at one variable at a time, whether you're a woman, whether you're gay, whether you're, it's just one instead of all mixed together. You can think about intersectionality as the difference between a fruit salad and a smoothie. We're not just pieces of pineapple, blueberry, and grape. We're all these things blended together. And our particular blend of areas of power and privilege that blend with each other and affect our own lived experiences. And then think about what the experiences of others might be. Now, remember, we'll never know someone else's experience ever. And intersectionality depends on the perception of experience. So you can't objectively identify what someone's intersectionality is. The whole idea here is just to get students thinking about this. Pardon me. Oh, I'm gonna take a drink too. All right. Like I said, just starting the discussion. Here's a quote by Kimberly Crenshaw. Consider an analogy to traffic in an intersection, coming and going in different directions. Discrimination, like traffic through an intersection, may flow in one direction and it may flow in another. If an accident happens in an intersection, it can be caused by cars traveling from any number of directions and sometimes from all of them. Similarly, if a Black woman is harmed because she is in an intersection, her injury could result from sex discrimination or race discrimination. But it is not always easy to reconstruct an accident. Sometimes the skid marks and the injuries indicate that they occurred simultaneously, frustrating efforts to determine which driver caused the harm. So you can think about that intersection, the racism with the sexism or misogyny. And we're not sure exactly what caused the accident. It's these things mixed together. And here's a little example. The intersection is very commonly used when talking about intersectionality. Guess why? It's in the name, spoiler. Okay. So here's one conceptualization of one way to possibly think about privilege and sources of oppression as well. Sources of privilege, sources of oppression. I hope you can see it. I know it's kind of small. We have this thick line in the middle kind of showing what identities in the US are more privileged up here and ones that face more oppression underneath. I'm going to be quiet for a second and let you kind of check it out and see what you see. All right, hopefully you got a sense of it. People who have their cameras on, are you good? Bad? Ready to move on? Nods. Thank you, camera people. All right. And as you saw, and something I should have said before, on one side, you have maybe the less dominant. So you can think of, we'll talk about androcentrism right now. So female versus male having more power. So that's kind of how this is structured. Should have said that before I gave you the silent break, but we're all learning here. We're all doing this. So what about the wizarding world, though? Where are the sources of power and privilege in the wizarding world? Sources of oppression? Get your little muggle minds thinking here. I guess I'll ask you. So are there any that you would add to this? I guess if you want to write it in the chat, that you would think of, that you think are in the wizarding world that aren't in the muggle world. I'll open the chat. Ooh, nice slur there, Jessie. But yes, Jessie said mudblood, indeed. So blood status is definitely one of them. So people who are pure blood definitely seem to, according to them, have a higher status than those who are muggle-born, which is what mudblood means. Thank you, Jessie. Any other examples from the wizarding world? Human versus non-human, excellent. So yes, one of our first activities in the class is going through creatures of near human intelligence. Wow, I'm really talking a lot about Umbridge. Guess what movie I just finished watching this weekend? So sorry about that. Talking about the idea of creatures, magical beings in the wizarding world versus humans. So let's see, giants, etc. Thank you, Squibs. They talk about Squibs, poor Squibs, right? Can't remember the term, wizards who don't have magic. Yeah, Chelsea, you're totally right. So that was Squibs. These are great examples. Thank you. All right. So we're going to do some examples together. Here we go. So on our left, we're going to start with the left, which is a more common character that you might think of. This is Hermione Granger, who is a powerful muggle-born witch who is the brightest witch of her age. So take a second, think about where within that description, areas of power and privilege and or places of oppression. Now, you don't need to answer, but in your head, you can answer. All right. So, good deal. So even though magical ability is one of the highest areas of privilege, she may have areas of oppression as she is female and especially muggle-born. So if you think about intersectionality with Hermione in this upper left quadrant, if we're looking at a Venn diagram, could be magical ability, could be a female, could be muggle-born. And then each of these, we have intersecting pieces. So that's kind of how we can think about intersectionality of Hermione. There we go. All right, on our right, maybe is a little lesser known character, Riemann Lupus, who I'm particularly fond of. This is a powerful half-blood wizard, and yes, I did have to Google that, who is also a werewolf. So think about his areas of power and privilege and areas of possible oppression for a sec. All right. So he is a powerful wizard. This is an area of privilege, while being half-blood and a werewolf are areas of oppression. So again, we can think about these maybe werewolf, wizard, and half-blood, and if we want to add another one, a male, or maybe a white male, we can add more into our Venn diagram. So we're going to now talk about mapping intersectionality, which is something I'm going to walk you through in kind of a scaffolding way. Here we have kind of an illustration of the way we're going to be doing it in a second. So we're going to have, imagine yourself or a character, we're going to get there in a second, in the middle, and you're going to think about the different things, pieces, think about that privilege, the illustration of the privilege versus areas of oppression on the bottom. We're going to be conceptualizing this mapping of intersectionality in those ways. So you're going to be thinking maybe about the person's race, education, sexuality, ability, age, gender, ethnicity, culture, language, class. We can think of 100 others. Or at least the number that we have in the illustration below or above. First is your turn. I would love for you to think about the different intersectional identities of Tom Riddle / Lord Voldemort. So if you can, I challenge you to, on your own, fill in each of these rounded rectangles with different parts of Riddle / Voldemort's identities. If anyone wants to share, you can go and jump in the chat. All right, Jen says Tom Riddle is a half-blood, mom was witch, and dad was muggle. Bit of a shock when he found out. Sorry, another quote from Harry Potter. Amber got it. She laughed. Thank you. So half-blood, not necessarily as bad as muggle-born or squib, but definitely not full-on pure blood. And spoiler alert, that kind of messed with his head as he grew up. Others in the chat, please. Thank you. Yes, male. And especially in Rowling's universe, it seems like the women are kind of on a second rung. I hate to say it, but they're not necessarily shown to be, well, I'll just leave it at that. So yes, being a male in this world seems to be a bit of definitely a power, an area of privilege. I don't think it's as discrepant as in our Muggle world. I think it's a little bit more equal, but not necessarily as good as it could have been. Level of power, excellent. He is incredibly powerful wizard. The most powerful wizard that ever existed, I think, is how they phrase it. Always a parcel tongue. Thank you, Jamie. What if you don't know what parcel tongue means? It means he can speak to snakes. So yes, he's multilingual. Not bad. Sorry, Jen in the chat said other than Dumbledore. And there is some debate as to who is the more powerful wizard. Thank you, Jen. Slytherin is a bad house. Amber, I take offense to that personally. Yeah. But yes, Slytherin is either super powerful or super oppressed, depending on how you think about it. But ambitious, cunning, we have a lot of traits that aren't necessarily all bad. These are amazing examples. Thank you so much. All right, you're getting the hang of it. You're getting the hang of it. Next, I'm going to have you go into small groups, if you don't mind. Pick a character, any character, and I found this amazing JPEG online. And in your small group, you're going to map that individual or being's intersectionalities. You won't be quizzed on it, although I would love for one person maybe to write about it in the chat. But yeah, let's give like maybe seven minutes on that, 8 minutes. So yeah, thank you. Heidi, I think you're good to go if you want to break them up. Have fun.
We should be good on the rooms. I didn't reset the timer from an event that we had yesterday, but I'll just let them go for 7 minutes and let people know when it's time to come back.
Thanks, Heidi. And I put my timer on too. So
perfect.
I don't think I've ever used the timer function. That's exciting.
I'm actually going to excuse myself while they're in the small group. I'll be right back. About 1 more minute, Heidi.
You let me know when you want me to close.
Oh. I guess about now.
Okay, they'll close in about 10 seconds.
Great, thank you. Welcome back, witches, wizards, and muggles. All righty, excellent. So I'm going to ask someone I know knows Harry Potter. I'm sorry, Jen Boa. Will you report out what I know, I'm sorry, I meant to text you during it, but will you report out who your group chose and what kind of stuff you came up with?
Hold on, let me allow her
There
to.
you are. I have to ask you to unmute. Yeah.
There you go.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I would have appreciated a text. I'm just kidding. So I was with Jamie, and we first discussed Molly Weasley as someone with a lot of intersectionality. And so some of the stuff we talked about is we had to Google if she was a pureblood witch or not, because neither of us knew right offhand, and she is pureblood. So that's obviously a privileged status. She is married to someone who works at the Ministry of Magic. So that would be privileged status, although his job is seen as sort of lesser at the ministry. So that sort of diminishes her a little bit. There's never any mention anywhere of any work that she's ever done outside of the home. So I feel like being a homemaker would be seen as being a lesser status as far as the privilege wheel goes. Jamie pointed out that she's a redhead, which has its own level of privilege depending. I feel like in the UK, it's a little more acceptable than it is in America, but I don't really know that for a fact. One thing that I think is really cool about her, so she's sort of underestimated because she's a woman, but in the end, spoiler alert, sorry for anyone, she ends up killing one of the most powerful witches ever in Bellatrix Lestrange, which that scene always makes me cry when she's like, "Not my daughter, you bitch." So good and so powerful, right? And so that makes me think that she is sort of higher, because even though all the negative stuff, she still shows in the end that she really does have more privilege and power than anyone expects her to, I think.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it. Thank you. All righty. There's one example of Jen Boa and Jamie mapping intersectionality of Molly Weasley. Thank you. Hopefully you had a good time and were able to map well in your character. As all scaffolding, now we're going to end the concept of using metaphor, and then we're starting further away and then bringing it closer and closer home. I'm going to ask you to think about yourself. Where are your areas of privilege? Where are your areas of possible oppression? And to help out, I'm actually going to go back to this slide just to keep up. So take about 5 minutes and think about your own areas. And this is definitely not an exhaustive list. Okay, maybe not full 5 minutes. I just realized how long 5 minutes is. Very silent. So maybe like a couple more minutes. All right. Now I'd like for you to think a little bit about maybe some of your intersectionalities as a Venn diagram. And so I will share my own. I am a white, mostly hetero, cisgender woman. So how does my whiteness relate to being mostly heterosexual? That would be this intersection right there. How does my mostly heterosexualism interact with me being cisgender? It would be right there. How does my whiteness interact with my cisgenderism? Would be this overlapping spot right here. And how do all three of those overlap? It's going to be that middle kind of part right there. So you can think about all those different intersectionalities in a Venn diagram is another way to conceptualize them. I'm going to end the talk in a second after I read this Albus Dumbledore quote, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open. Thank you so much, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Brittany. That was amazing. I feel like I learned so much, and I don't want to claim the Q&A time, so I want to open it up. You all should be able to unmute yourselves now. Yes, okay. So if you want to unmute, raise your hand, physically wave at the camera, feel free to, or use the chat, feel free to come on in with questions. Yeah, Amber.
Hi, so I'm writing a feature article for the East Tennessean. So I wanted to just clarify a couple of things. This class is going to be offered in coming semesters?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm working on getting, you don't know this, but the curriculum part and getting it approved is kind of challenging. So I'm working on getting it through. We've already tapped out, sorry. After you said the newspaper, I got really nervous. But for some reason,
I'm so sorry.
You can only teach, you're only allowed to teach special topics like a certain number of times. And we can't teach it anymore as a special topic. It has to be actually officially blessed and approved. So I'm working on that now.
Okay. So is there going to be a class in the fall, or is this just sometime, keep your eye out for it?
Yeah, it'll probably be spring of next year. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks. You might as well have been Rita Skeeter. Yeah, Brandon.
Hey, quick question. So when you're using this method and you were kind of using the Harry Potter world to discuss these, how do you recommend then transitioning into the real topics? So how does that work?
Well, you experienced it yourself. So I start further away and then slowly bring them closer and closer in. One thing I found that, and Colleen and I really found that helped, is breaking them into small groups. So they're not alone. They're not feeling isolated during these difficult dialogue moments. And they're able to have that participatory culture where they're able to rely on and their peers are actually explaining to them what's happening and maybe where there might be faulty thinking instead of that higher up, that professor sliding in. Did that help?
It does, yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. Oh, I didn't look at the chat. Sorry. PowerPoint. Yes, I can. If you email me, my email is Wilkins, my last name, B as in boy, @etsu.edu.
And Jesse, after this is finished, we'll have it sent to sort of processing, and we post these on YouTube and on our website. So you'll be able to find it there. And Heather Shipley in the chat asks, will this course be in person?
I would love that. We have so much fun. We give little dossiers out with, anyway, we have fun. And then the Triwizard Tournament, super fun. We have, well, hold on, Cami, you've taken the class. Can you unmute and talk about it just real quick?
Yeah, the class is super fun because the first day we get to be sorted into our houses. So we'll seriously sit in front of the whole class and they'll put the sorting hat on our head and then they'll play the little like talking voice. Yeah, and then we'll get our own pins that we get to wear to class that has our house on it, and you get points if you wear your pin to class every day. So it's just really cool to get to be with the students and have that like extra magical feeling with it.
Thanks, Cami. Yeah, and we try to make it fun. So the Triwizard Tournament is the final exam. We have you choose in the bag, you get to choose what dragon, and the dragon that you choose determines what question you get to answer. Then you get the magical egg, and the egg gives you the next task that you need to do for the final. And then finally, you map your own intersectionality. Spoiler, that's pretty much what the final is. So, yeah. Sam, please.
This sounds so fun. I want to take your class so badly. But one of the questions that came up in our small group was, what if you, because we had a couple of people that didn't know all the ins and outs of each character. So mapping their intersectionality was difficult. So if you have that in the classroom, do you just have them like Google it, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, so like Jen explained, she Googled a thing, and that's fine. We don't expect, at least Colleen and I, when we've taught this, didn't expect people to have read all the books, at least watch the movies once and get a good idea. And what we've done is we've separated people out. So people who know a little bit more, we sprinkled them in with people who maybe don't know as much. No shame in that game. There's no shaming in that, but we just try to make it a more equal playing field. Yeah. Thanks, Sam. That was a good question. That can't be all. Come on. Any others?
Oh. Hi, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So you were talking earlier about the pedagogy of fandom and utilizing, obviously, the bigger picture of utilizing pop culture to teach social justice concepts. Do you go into that pedagogy more deeply into the class, or is it more really just focused on, we're going to be using this fandom to introduce the social justice concepts versus the learning the pedagogy to be able to adapt it to other kinds of fandom?
No, we stick to just the Harry Potter. We've talked about maybe expanding out to like a choose your own adventure type course, where if you're more of a Lord of the Rings geek, depending on what your fandom of choice is, maybe is making a choose your own adventure. That seemed way too difficult, especially because, our required textbook is, you can't see it, the psychology of Harry Potter, the sociology of Harry Potter. It would be way too hard to try to break it all down, Star Wars, you name it. So no, we're pretty much sticking with Harry Potter at this point. Additionally, I've got the costume. No, I'm joking.
I was just more, I was really interested in is there a pedagogy type class versus we're going to do Lord of the splitting it up into all these different fandoms. Just is it is there an opportunity to learn the pedagogy part?
That was pretty much what the middle part of the talk was, but that's as far as I go into it here. Okay. If you're interested, I'm happy to share all my resources. I wanted to satisfy the people who are just here for the Potter and for the teaching. So, and please do follow up, Jamie, really. Someone asked, will this be a sociology course? It doesn't sound silly, Jesse. Be gentle with yourself. So no, we keep it in social work. That's what I know. That's where I teach. I am not opposed to, I think of social work as kind of an applied sociology in a way. So that's my home. That's where I kind of teach from. Oh, thanks, Heather. She said, I love this. Let's see. Okay. Any other questions? I'm cool. Yes, please, Amber. Rita.
No, please not Rita Skeeter. Aside, at risk of having you restate the obvious, what are some of the best skills and things that students can learn from taking this class?
Whew. Yep.
Sorry.
Okay. They learn about the adverse childhood effects, and we compare Harry Potter versus Lord Voldemort, just to show how similar they are and how differently you can become, despite having similar and or almost the same adverse childhood experiences. And then what are the others? We go into some brief discussion about cognitive behavioral therapy. We look at one example from the movie where Ron kind of freaks out and leaves the group. He's upset with, I think it's Deathly Hallows Part 1. He leaves Harry and Hermione and gets mad. Hopefully people are nodding. They know the scene. Okay, great. He had been wearing the Horcrux. His arm is hurt and he leaves. We watch that scene and then we kind of think about what is the perception from Harry's perception, Hermione's perception, and Ron's perception to try to lead us into a conversation about how cognitive behavioral therapy kind of might work. Other things, the intersectionality, the thinking about the media. We print up different headlines from the two newspapers, the Quibbler and the Daily Prophet, and that helps understand, how the media can definitely influence public opinion. Is that enough, Amber? Okay, cool. If you're interested, I have a whole list. If you email me after this, I can give you a whole list. Those are just the ones off the top of my head.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Heather writes in the chat, do we pick our house? Or are we assigned? I only ask because I'm a proud Slytherin myself. I like that, Heather. Thank you. You actually let me know ahead of class. And then when you put the hat on your head, magically it says the house you were already assigned to. So that's how we roll. And typically in the social work classes, it's mostly Hufflepuffs. Slytherins are usually the lesser represented, lesser represented of the houses.
I love this. I will ask a question, just kind of, I was thinking about this earlier when somebody asked about how much sort of like Harry Potter knowledge you need, right? And you mentioned like showing clips from the film. So this is where my like film literature background comes in. Like, do you also do like, maybe not close reading in the literary sense, but do you like do sections of the text in class, like to kind of see how the actual language and like the film language contributes to these bigger topics? Or
no, sorry, Chelsea.
It's okay. I mean, that's like what I love, and so that's
now
immediately what I think. I'm like, oh yeah, let's talk about how the lighting portrays their different perspectives. But obviously I'm a film person, so that would be like where I would go immediately. But I was just curious if you did like, I mean, like, do you have people read like sections of the books as part of or maybe that's included in the textbooks you have? I don't know how copyright would work there, but.
No. And I mean, I know for like, there was a quote of the day that we put on the board that kind of set the scene for the rest of the class. So yeah, we do use quotes and definitely dissect the books. The movies seem to be a little bit more attainable for people, I think, and especially when you're just taking a 15-week course. 7 books are,
sure.
Yeah, so thanks for asking.
Do you move through them chronologically?
No.
Follow-up question. Okay, so you just kind of around. So you're not really, I mean, maybe you're not inspiring people to read the books if they haven't, because then they just know what happens.
Yeah,
Every day is a spoiler alert.
Yeah, the class is much more focused on that social justice aspect, getting people to tackle those tough concepts. I mean, white privilege puts, people, they freak out. I mean, critical race theory, people freak out. So hopefully making these a little bit more digestible so that it's not quite emotional brain scary. I can't, I can't, and they can hopefully think about it more from a logical place.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful.
Students dress up. Yes. When we taught the class, especially over Halloween, students would dress up. And then of course, wearing their house colors, and yes, yep. We encouraged fun.
Well, do we have any final questions or comments, or just people who want to come off mute and say thank you to Dr. Wilkins?
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Zachary.
Thank you.
Lexi.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was unexpected. Oh, Sam raised her hand.
Sorry, I have so many questions always.
Oh, no, please.
So one of my questions I had was, I know that I love all of this. I'm going to take some of this and use some of this myself. I'm so excited. But I know that sometimes one of the pushbacks with Harry Potter that I've heard from students, people, whatever, is that anything magically related is like against their religion. So wouldn't want to hear about it, wouldn't want to know about it. How have you dealt with that? I know that's kind of a big question to ask right here at the end, but has that happened, and how did you deal with it?
So it's really been a self-selecting group who took the elective. Typically, they know what they're getting into. It's called Harry Potter and the Quest for Social Justice. So yeah, I haven't really run into that piece. I'm sorry, Sam. We can talk more about it later. Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's a great point, though, especially if you're just bringing in part in a class. That's a really good point. Oh, chat people. Thank you, chat people. Thank you guys for coming. This was fabulous. I've been anxious about it for weeks, and this was a lot more fun. than my anxiety told me it was going to be. So thank you.
Yay. Well, good. Well, as the praise rolls in, feel free to keep that praise rolling in for Dr. Wilkins in the chat, or just any final comments. I will just say that thank you to everyone who came today. This was such a large and delightful group for such a fun talk. I hope you will come back and join us. Our next WGS on Wednesday is on March 2nd, so the first Wednesday in March at noon. Keep your eyes out for more information. It will be with Dr. Jean Swindle. So we'll keep your eyes on the calendar, maybe put it in your calendar to remind yourself that maybe you'll come back. Thank you again, Dr. Wilkins. This was, again, just such a delight. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone. So many people.